In her book, the medium said that when people are led to meet her, their lives change forever. Given what had happened already, I was nervous to meet this medium. And I was still seriously weirded out by all of the insane things that had been happening exponentially in my life since everything that happened with Joss. I felt like I couldn't explain what I was going through to anybody, and I would often wake up in the morning and just stare at the ceiling and think to myself, what weird thing is going to happen next? As I was working on the pitch for this Medium project in anticipation of our in-person meeting in late October 2015, a friend of mine randomly reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in going to Japan with him. He had made plans to visit one of his friends in Taiwan and thought it'd be cool to jump over to Japan before heading back to LA. And he knew that I hadn't been in a long time and that I would probably be interested in going. And I was, of course, like, you know what? YOLO. Like, I deserve a trip to Japan right now, and I'm just going to do it. I hadn't been in Japan since I studied abroad there in 2005. And when I saw the dates, I realized, oh my gosh, Ayumi Hamasaki is having her TA Limited Live Tour at this exact same time. And I could get tickets to one of the shows in Osaka, and it would work with our schedule. So I wound up submitting to get tickets for this, and I became so excited. I had always wanted to see Ayumi Hamasaki live. It was one of my life dreams, and now I was finally going to make it happen. And I was needing a win so bad in life, and it was something that just gave me something to look forward to. So I couldn't wait. I went to Japan a couple weeks later. My friend and I had an amazing time, and towards the end of our trip was the day of the concert. And I remember I went to go sit in the really long line for tour goods for 5 hours, and I was like, hey friend, you can just go, to Osaka Castle while I do this. You don't have to wait here with me. So I was just chilling in line, and I got these tour goods, and then I went to the will call to pick up my tickets, and I got the tickets from the guy, and I looked down at the entry number, and I saw that my friend and I were going to be one of the first 120 people inside of the 5,000 person venue. And I almost burst into tears. I was so happy. I couldn't believe my luck that I was going to be able to get so close to the stage. And I honestly, I can hardly remember, I felt like the whole concert was an out-of-body experience. It was so amazing for me. And she sang some of my favorite songs, including, of course, Evolution. And I just felt like I'd had the perfect trip. And it was the happiest I had felt since I had last seen Joss in London. And I really just do love travel in general. And so whenever I travel, I just always feel like I'm, I don't know, living my purpose or something like that. So it was just a really great way to kind of uplift my spirits in the wake of all the crazy things that were happening. When I got back to LA, I met this medium, and I basically got the job to write this script. And while I was waiting for the details of the deal to be worked out, I was really itching at this point to get back to writing my own work. I hadn't really written anything since Arcana. Nothing was really working. I was working so hard to try and get a job and I was so kind of messed up that I just didn't really have any inspiration or motivation to work on my own stuff. But after Japan and having, been a year out from my Kundalini awakening and stuff, I was like, okay, I now know that I want to write something about spiritual awakening stuff. And I feel like that's probably something I'm meant to be doing right now. So I was kind of contemplating what angle I wanted to go into this with. And since I had learned through my studies that everything is vibration, I began to get curious about the metaphysics of music and if there was some way to explore that in the context of a narrative of a TV show. And I remember I was looking for more information on the metaphysics of music and just in general, if anyone had written stuff about it. And I remember I was sitting at a Panera Bread, like in Beverly Hills or something, and I was reading this book called The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life. And I was very intrigued by all of the things that I was reading in this book. And I got an idea for a TV show when I read a quote in this book that was like a Johannes Kepler quote. It just kind of like popped into my mind, this new idea. And I was like, oh my gosh, finally, like some inspiration has happened. And I began to get excited about working on my own project again. And it was going to be kind of inspired by like the music of the spheres. Like I said, I was like seriously fascinated by all this stuff in this book, like the fall of Atlantis, and I'd always been drawn to like ancient history and ancient civilizations, and I even wrote a pilot about Atlantis in college. It wasn't that great, but I've always been interested in that kind of stuff. But before I could do anything more with all these inspirations that were coming to me, I was called in to pitch for another movie at a studio that was, interestingly enough, also spiritually themed. So in the midst of all of this, while I was working on these pitches and like trying to kind of get the groundwork going on my new thing, I got a call one day from my agent at CAA, and she reached out to me saying that there was a staff writer job opening up on a new show at Cartoon Network called OKKO Let's Be Heroes. And while I was more interested in working in live action, I always did love cartoons. Obviously, I watched a lot of cartoons growing up and anime, and I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to still get to work in TV and like have like a consistent regular job to like go to and show up at. The interview went really well, and I wound up getting that job on OKKO Let's Be Heroes, and I started right after Thanksgiving 2015. By the end of 2015, I had basically gone from 0 jobs over the course of, a year and a half of being unemployed since I was fired from S.H.I.E.L.D. to basically 3 jobs at once. The Medium project, this studio thing that I was basically about to get after the pitching process, and then Cartoon Network. And I found it very interesting that 2 of the things I had gotten were spiritual in nature. And then this OKKO Let's Be Heroes thing kind of reminded me a little bit of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the sense that it was about like the regular people being the heroes, like everyone had powers and everybody was a hero. And so I began to sense that there was like a theme developing here with these things that I was getting. Because it's not like I hadn't pitched for all these other things, it's like I had pitched for so many things and these were the things that I was getting. And so I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. And I knew that the universe was like trying to tell me something through these jobs, but I still didn't quite know where any of this was leading me. Meanwhile, by night, I was still secretly training with Fleur to become a medium, and I told almost no one in my life that I was doing this, not even my roommates. I kept it very, very close to the chest, and I, part of this was because I thought I was going to be seen as crazy, and the other part really had to do with the fact that I still had such incredibly low self-esteem in general, and especially when it came to this stuff. And I just was dealing with a lot of self-doubt around my ability to do any of it. Like, even though I had, even though I would prove to myself through doing it that I could do it, it's like every single time before I would go to do it, I would like question and overthink and all these things. And it was almost like it was harder for me to like break through my own like mind chatter than actually do it itself. But the constant validation of just consistently showing up over time and just continuing to practice and do it gradually built my confidence around my abilities. But at the same time, as time went on, it began to kind of feel like I was living this double life. by this point, to say I was stressed out about everything was an understatement. Between all my jobs, trained to be a medium, feeling like all these weird things were happening all the time, I just was like fried. And while some of the side effects from my Kundalini awakening had subsided throughout that past year, I was still feeling like not 100% in my body. Like I still had side effects such as heart palpitations, chronic shortness of breath, occasional nausea still. Like I was mostly in my body kind of, but it was just like other physical things that were like really bothering me. And I had gone to see some like Western allopathic doctors about this, but of course they didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. And they were like, here's some lorazepam. And I was like, I don't think so. So in my quest for answers, I was like, you know what? That Ayurveda thing really worked for Marissa Tancherone, my old boss, when she was really sick. And maybe since this thing that happened to me is like clearly a spiritual phenomenon, maybe this Ayurveda thing could work for me. So I wound up going to the same Ayurveda spa that Marissa would frequent. And I signed up to do this thing called panchakarma in order to like cure my nervous system, basically. And I remember going in there for the consultation. The Ayurveda woman like felt my pulse and looked at my tongue, and she was like, how old are you? And I was like 25, and she was like, ooh. And I was like, oh no. And yeah, she was like, what happened to you? And I was like, I don't really know how to describe this. My nervous system was really messed up, and my adrenals were seriously out of whack. And so I knew that panchakarma would probably really help me. And I did, I think it was 7 days of panchakarma, and it really, it kind of cost me a pretty penny, but since I had gotten all these jobs, I was like, well, I can technically afford this, so I might as well do it to invest in my health. In all of this, Ayurveda thing I was going through, I began to get really interested in exploring more of the Vedic stuff more. And interestingly, I had asked this medium when I met her if she had any book recommendations for me that could help me, bolster my, knowledge base for all of this. And she recommended that I read this book, Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And I read this book in December of 2015, around the time I was doing this panchakarma thing. And it definitely opened my eyes to a lot of the whole like Hinduism, Eastern side of things in terms of spirituality. And when I had more so been like reading a lot of like the Western stuff. And in this book, it's a very long book. I mean, a lot of people have read it. It's kind of like famous spiritual book, but in this book, I became fascinated by this thing, Kriya Yoga, that Yogananda had learned from his guru, who had learned it from his guru, who had gotten it from this like mysterious being named Babaji. And they said that this Kriya Yoga technique was the lightning path to enlightenment. And the book doesn't tell you how to do Kriya Yoga; it just talks about Kriya Yoga. And I was like, this Kriya Yoga sounds like something I should do. Like I, of course, being the overly ambitious, impatient person that I am, I was like, I want the fastest way to enlightenment. And this Kriya Yoga seems to be my ticket to success. So in the new year, I thought maybe I would try to explore and see if I could find some place in LA that would teach me this Kriya Yoga. And I also knew in the midst of all this as well that I wanted to see an astrologer, but in the back of my mind, I knew that like everything else, the exact right astrologer would probably just randomly appear on my path at the exact right moment that I needed it. So I didn't actively pursue an astrologer that year, but it was something that was kind of in the back of my mind of like, I should probably one day explore astrology as well. As 2016 went on, in the winter and the spring, I was just like working constantly. I didn't really have much of a life. Finally, in between deadlines, I went to Japan again with one of my other friends for my birthday, my 26th birthday, and for the cherry blossom season, which I had always wanted to see. And when I got back, I started working even more on just like my day job and at Cartoon Network, and on my freelance projects that I was working on. And I was a little bummed that as soon as I got all this inspiration back in November, that I instantly got like 3 jobs and like couldn't really work on my own stuff. But at the same time, I was really grateful to be able to have like paying jobs and not have to worry as much about money at this point, because my dad was like getting really annoyed at me that I like was not doing anything with my life. And so I was just like continuing to work. And I remember one day I was reading this book at my job. Like I was still kind of doing my own like spiritual studies too on the side while I was working, just because my mind kind of needs to constantly have that. And I was drawn to read this book called Serpent of Light, and it's by the same author who wrote The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, Drunvalo Melchizedek. And this book, Serpent of Light, is about Drunvalo Melchizedek's spiritual journeys, like sacred travel journeys to sacred sites around the world where he did ceremonies for planetary healing. And this work of doing ceremonies at sacred sites for planetary healing is called grid working. And he explains in this book that he was called to do this in anticipation of the year 2012, when it was said that the Kundalini of the earth would switch polarities and catalyze the rise of the divine feminine energy on earth. And basically, I realized through reading this that in the same way that we humans have our energy body with like the 7 or 7 primary chakras: root, sacral, solar plexus, heart, throat, third eye, and then crown. The earth also has an energy body with the chakra system on it, and it's laid out in its own way. Again, it's the concept of the holographic universe where the microcosm is in the macrocosm and vice versa. So he was explaining that in this book, Serpent of Light, that the Kundalini was moving from the Himalayas area to the Lake Titicaca region, or like the Chile, Peru, Lake Titicaca area, Andes area, where the sacral chakra of the earth is. And I was reading all these stories that he was saying about all of his spiritual adventures doing this work, and I was very fascinated by it. I was like, wow, like I love travel. I am interested in spiritual stuff. I always loved going to ancient sites and things like that. Like when I went to London, I went to Stonehenge and everything, and I had always been drawn to that, but I didn't really realize that there was like a way to do planetary healing using that energy with like the ley lines and all these different things. And so I was like, wow, this is so cool. Like I really want to incorporate this into what I'm writing about. And I really want to learn more about like this grid working thing. And so I remember I was reading this book when I was at work one day, and I noticed that it was like time to go. So I was like, okay, like shut my computer down, like go to the garage and get my car out. And I drove to like the first little intersection where you can only go left or right because it's like a T-shape intersection. And I was the first person at the red light or whatever. And as I was sitting there waiting for the light to change, I saw someone started to cross the crosswalk in front of me. And I looked up, and this person was like this dude wearing like khaki cargo pants and like a white polo and a cap or something. And wrapped around him was the biggest snake I had ever seen in my life. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was just reading this book, Serpent of Light, and I'm now sitting here at this red light, and this dude is just walking with a giant snake wrapped around him. Like, I thought I was on candid camera. Like, I was so shocked. And I was like, this feels like some major omen from the universe. Almost like this person was planted there to like walk in front of me, like enter stage right or whatever at this time. I could hardly believe it. And I never forgot it. I as I was driving home, I was like, there's something with this book and this grid working thing that's so important for me to know. And I really, at that point, I was like, I really hope that one day I can meet people who do this so that I can ask them more about it, because it was just kind of hard to find information about it that I felt was like reliable outside of this book. And another thing that occurred to me as I was reading this book was that the whole concept of 2012 was definitely very present in my mind. It wasn't lost on me that I met Joss in 2012 and that everything that I was experiencing was a direct result of the things that I had started in that year. And so, I had heard about this whole 2012 thing, way before any of this ever happened. And, it was kind of in the cultural like zeitgeist a little bit in the years before 2012 happened, but I didn't really know what to make of it. But in the wake of everything that had gone down and the more I learned about spiritual ascension and all this stuff, I began to definitely feel convinced that the 2012 thing was definitely a thing, and that we were entering into some new time period that we were just getting started with, and that the rise of the divine feminine energy on Earth was definitely a major part of it in order to kind of recalibrate the heavy patriarchal influence that we've been under for many thousands of years at this point, and to kind of course correct where we're going as a species. In my mind, it was definitely evident that the root of all of our problems was this imbalance of the masculine and the feminine energies on Earth, and the maladaptive masculine energy that isn't like the true masculine energy that we see today in the form of patriarchy, and that the divine feminine energy return would be helping to essentially heal a lot of these imbalances. And I kept thinking, I was like, I went to all girls school and I only really had female friends and I only had sisters, and I've always been, interested in like feminism and like gender studies and all these things. And so it kind of just felt like there was a lot in my life that had kind of set me up to maybe be a part of this in some way, but I just didn't really know exactly what that was going to look like, outside of the fact that I knew I was probably supposed to write something involving all of this stuff. I still kind of felt very in the dark about where all this was leading me, only that I was getting more puzzle pieces, but like it was only serving to make the puzzle even bigger instead of filling in the picture. And I felt like, after this Serpent of Light incident, that at least this was a track that I felt like I could go down and that was being supported. And that the more, if I followed this trail, that maybe it would lead me to more answers. By the spring and summer of 2016, I decided that I was going to get a little proactive and start to get some readings from other psychics and things like that out there to see what they would get if they read my energy. For whatever reason, in 2015, it just never occurred to me to like get a reading from somebody about all of this. And so in 2016, I did see a few different psychics and mediums and palm readers and stuff that I just kind of encountered. And all of them said a variation of the same thing to me, which is that around the age of 31 would be like my big year for success, and that I would definitely have some success in television and all these different things, and that right now it was just about me kind of bridging the gap between where I was then and that point. I was somewhat reassured by this, given the fact that multiple people independently were confirming like the 30, 31, 32 age range of success for me. And so I was like, okay, all I have to do is power through the next 5 years and I will be able to like get to where I want to be. I was definitely a little impatient and ambitious still and wanting to like kind of get success earlier, but I also knew that I had a lot to learn still and I needed to develop my craft more. And I was like, well, as long as I can keep working these jobs and stuff, I can handle the fact that maybe I won't have like my big break of my own stuff until around the age of 31. In the meantime, I decided that I was going to try and find a place that would teach me Kriya Yoga. And I looked around LA and I looked into SRF, which is the Self-Realization Fellowship that Yogananda founded, but they don't really give you the technique right away. And of course, yet again, I was like, I don't want to wait a year for Kriya Yoga. I want Kriya Yoga now. So I didn't even bother going through SRF. I then found this place, another place in town, Ananda, that you can get Kriya Yoga through. And I did actually go to Ananda weekly for a little while to do their protocol, which was a bit shorter to get the Kriya. But they ultimately want you to like dedicate yourself to a guru. And I felt very uncomfortable with the guru concept. And I thought it was weird that on the walls, all they have are like these dudes. And it's like, I'm sure these dudes were great. It's just, I felt like the presence of the divine feminine was lacking in these places. And I thought it was just kind of weird that, it was so imbalanced in that way. And because I asked them about it, and then they were so nice, but they got a little flustered about it. And I was just like, okay, it's just maybe not the right fit for me to learn Kriya Yoga here. So I eventually just kind of gave up because I was so busy with my other work. I was like, you know what? I'll just have to put a pin in this and maybe I will find a place that will teach me Kriya Yoga later. Meanwhile, throughout all of these other things, in the background of all of this, the presidential election stuff was starting to heat up. And, I, up until that point, I historically have always been against the two-party system. I was always kind of a rebel against the establishment. Very early on in my political interest of the world, in high school, I was a senior, I guess. I was a senior in high school when the primaries for the 2008 election were going on. And I noticed very early on that the way the Republican Party treated Ron Paul and the way the Democratic Party treated Dennis Kucinich, that both parties were corrupt and that they both were rigging the elections in order for their preferred establishment people to make it in, and that there was really no change possible in the two-party system. And so I actually, in every election, general election, up until recently, I only voted third party as a protest. So that was like my political background coming into all of this. Now, of course, 2016 rolls around, and I was very interested in the Bernie Sanders campaign. I actually felt that he had something to offer this place instead of the usual rigmarole of establishment stuff. I knew that the agenda would be working against him, but I also felt that he was the only person who could beat Trump. I felt very early on that Hillary, if she were the nominee, that she would lose to Trump. And so my thought was that my support of Bernie Sanders was also like key in not having Trump. So I became very enthusiastic about Bernie Sanders. I kind of felt like there was hope for the world if he, became the nominee and could become president. But I definitely felt that the presence of Trump was a concerning situation. And as time went on, I began to get very nervous because I saw how he was getting so much free TV promotion. And given what I had begun to discover about TV and the power of reality creation and how TV and reality were becoming one thing, I was like, the more people give Trump airtime, the more powerful he becomes. Like, I was like, this is horrible. People should just stop paying attention to him. But of course, the reality TV show of him was so like appealing to the mainstream media. I could see the train wreck happening. Like, by the summer, I was trying to keep hope alive, but I was also like, I'm getting really nervous that this could go south really fast. By August of 2016, I was wrapping up my freelance projects, and I went on a quick vacation to Scotland with a friend of mine. And I really was excited to go because I'd never been to Scotland before. I have Scottish ancestry, and I also was and still am obsessed with the TV show Outlander. I actually, in the wake of all of this spiritual stuff, I had gone from watching so many TV shows to almost zero TV shows. But one of the only shows that I would like actually watch over and over again was Outlander. And for me, it was definitely like my kind of like romance security blanket a little bit. Like, I'm such a romantic at heart, and it was good to be busy because it kind of kept me, from mind spiraling about, my lack of a romantic life. But I deep down have always really yearned and craved like a romantic partnership. And, after the thing with Joss, I was like still so depressed about my prospects, and deep down, like I still had feelings for him, but I just kept pushing them away and away and away and down, whatever, to like try and just never think about him or what happened again. By this point, it had been almost 2 years since my big Kundalini awakening experience, and even longer since I had seen him in person. It began to almost feel like the whole thing had been a dream and maybe didn't even happen at all. When I went back to think on all the memories of us, I just became so sad, and I would just feel like, I don't know, it was almost like the most happiest moments of my life had become the most saddest moments of my life. And so I just, I don't know, tried to channel that yearning into just like shipping the couple in Outlander and like not thinking about my own life. Like I would try to go on dates here and there on Hinge or whatever every now and then, but they were all just kind of busts, and nothing ever went anywhere. And I just kind of became more depressed. So I kind of just deleted the apps after a while and figured, like I have all this stuff going on between like all my work and spirituality stuff. I just don't really have the bandwidth for dating at this point. Plus I like don't even know what I would talk to a person about. It's like I still felt like it was hard for me to connect with people, even my own friends, because of everything that was going on. About a year into my mediumship development, like September of 2016, I did eventually come out to my roommates about me being a medium, and that the meditation group that I was going to weekly was actually a mediumship development group. And they seemed pretty accepting. They were kind of like, okay, like they didn't really have much to say about it that I recall. And I did begin to tell a few other people in my life that were close to me as well. But I still kept it pretty close to me. I still wasn't very open or out of the broom closet or whatever about it to very many people. And I did sort of feel by this point that I was beginning to drift farther and farther apart from a lot of my friends. Like, it wasn't that I didn't like them or that I wasn't still friends with them. It was just more like the gap between my experience and their understanding of what I was going through was widening more and more by the day. And again, none of this was their fault or my fault. It's just that a lot of times, you know, when these spiritual things start happening to you, it becomes hard to, I don't know, relate to people. At least for me, it just kind of became hard for me to describe, you know, or to like relate to people in the same way anymore. Like, I was already kind of a weird person before all of this. And then after this, it just became like even more impossible for me to feel like I could connect to people. And I also was still like struggling with having disconnected my relationship with my mom. Like, I still hadn't spoken to her in 2 years, and that was giving me a lot of grief. I had spent a lot of holidays by myself by that point, and they were really hard for me. And I also, you know, when I was at work at Cartoon Network, I did befriend like my immediate coworkers. Like, I shared an office with someone, and like, you know, the two head writers, the creator of the show and like his right-hand man, Ian and Toby, they were really great, and I really loved working with them. And like my other coworker, Dave, who I shared an office with. But I made kind of a point to not really try to befriend a lot of people on the crew. Not because I didn't like them, because they're actually all really great and funny and talented. It's more like I had such like PTSD from being fired from SHIELD, and I had really strived to be like very social at SHIELD and like befriended a lot of people, and I felt like I was kind of well liked among a lot of people, and it was like we were this big happy family until you get fired from your family, and then you lose all of that family. And so I think I had such residual like kind of trauma from that experience that I was like, I'm just not going to get close to people here because I don't know when I'm going to be leaving. Like, I kind of felt like I could leave at any moment for a long time. When I first started working at Cartoon Network, I was like, I thought I could be gone in 6 months. I thought I could be gone, you know, in less than a year or something like that. So I was like, what's the point? Of course, I wound up actually being there for a lot longer than I thought I would be there for. And so I kind of regretted not wanting to get closer to people. But the reason for it wasn't because I didn't want to. It was more because I felt like if I did that, I would then open myself up to be getting hurt by getting fired or something. Like, I was just kind of paranoid. By late September and October 2016, I had finally finished my freelance projects, and nothing ever really came of them after that. And I sort of realized that I was made to do them because the universe really wanted me to know about the topics. It was less about me kind of having any like long-standing career thing happen with them. But when they were done, I was like, okay, I need to write my own thing finally. I have time, and I need to like get it done as soon as possible because I really wanted to go out for staffing the following season. And I knew that I would only be able to do so if I had a new sample to show my reps, because they, for whatever reason, didn't want to use Arcana as my sample for staffing jobs. I don't know why. And so I very quickly like crapped out a script. I wrote it all in like the span of maybe a month in late September, early October, because I knew that I needed to like keep the momentum going of how much I've been working, or else if I like stopped, I was afraid that the inertia of like not working would like catch up to me, and then I would just be kind of stuck. So I crapped out this script, and as I was doing this, I was led to read another book called Serpent in the Sky by John Anthony West. And this was a book about like the sacred archaeology of ancient Egypt. and it was basically his interpretation of the work of R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. And again, it's a little bit out there, esoteric, but it was something that really, like Serpent of Light, Serpent in the Sky was also a very activating book for me. I felt that it was touching on something really deep and interesting. And he has this whole theory that, ancient Egypt was seeded by the ancient civilization of Atlantis and all these different things. And so again, I just was like very interested in all of this kind of ancient archaeology, sacred sites, ancient civilizations, energy work, grid work, all this kind of stuff. And I knew that I one day really wanted to go to Egypt. I've always been fascinated by the pyramids and all of the mythology of ancient Egypt and these things. And I used a lot of this inspiration I got from reading this book also, and infused it with, channeled that into what I was working on. Meanwhile, throughout all of this, I found the work of this constitutional lawyer named Daniel Sheehan. All the election stuff was like really heating up at this point, and it was, looking like way too close to call for my comfort. And a lot of people were talking about the whole like fake news thing and like, what is the truth? And I was like, this is so weird. Like, I was really wondering, like, what makes people think things are true? Like, what makes people convinced of what their truth is, basically? And in trying to find answers to this, I found the work of Daniel Sheehan, and I watched some of his lectures, classes on his YouTube channel that he did for UC Santa Cruz, I believe is the university that he taught at. And I watched this whole class called The Role of the Public Intellectual. And in this class, he speaks about his desire to learn that exact same thing, and how he was told by someone at Harvard Divinity School that there's like a quadrant of like 4 things that if they are mutually consistent with one another, it's the cosmology, teleology, ontology, and epistemology of a person. And if those 4 things are mutually consistent with each other, they generate a mode of ethical reasoning, which then generates a kind of political philosophy from which you operate. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is fascinating. And like, yet again, it all goes back to cosmology, which is why myth is so important, because it is a way to convey a cosmology that then people can anchor into and be able to operate from in a way that is in harmony with the environment and the world and people. And also in this class, he spoke about, and his other work, he spoke about how decolonization is a prerequisite to any ET contact. And I realized that he was totally right. Like, in order for us to like reach high into the heavens, we have to like root down just as deep. And that means, in many ways, decolonizing our entire society and re-indigenizing our minds and hearts and our relationship with each other and the planet. And I had never heard this perspective before, and it definitely resonated with me deeply, especially because all the Standing Rock stuff was going on at this time and heating up, and I was very sympathetic to their cause. And as the daughter of a Texas oil person, I definitely have felt throughout my life a kind of guilt for being the direct beneficiary of such devastation that has been brought upon people's lives and on the planet. And I always have felt that I wanted to somehow use what I've gained from this to be a part of a solution in whatever way possible. And so when I realized this, I was like, wow, this makes total sense, and is something that I really need to like look into more. However, before I could find out more information about any of this, the election rolled around, and You know, I felt very tense, like everybody, I'm sure, in the build up to that day. And I remember the day of the election, I was sitting in the pitch room for OKKO, Let's Be Heroes. And that day we were pitching, or the storyboard artists were pitching a episode that we had developed that was a Captain Planet like crossover episode about climate change. And I just remember sitting there like, this is kind of an omen of like where things are about to go, isn't it? And I just had this sinking feeling the whole day. And I remember just driving back and like the all the way from Burbank to where I was living, like on the west side. And I was just like, this is not going to end well. And I got home and my roommate was there and another friend of mine was there, and we just were watching the shit show unfold. And we were just, it was very surreal for us all. And I immediately scrapped my script that I had written. I was like, this is absolute bullshit. Like, I feel like I'm about to have a huge recalibration of my entire life. And I knew that it was like about to be like a huge like wake up call for not just America, but like the whole world. And in the midst of all of this, Fleur, who I had still been studying with, announced that she was going to have a sacred journey to India the following year, the following November. So November of 2017. And I decided that I definitely need to go to India for whatever reason. I was like, I think I'm meant to go on this trip. So I signed up for that. And, but mostly I was like spiraling into my like depression and existential angst that the Trump victory kind of wrought upon my whole life. I was like, wow, you know, I really thought this would happen kind of, but at the same time, it's like, I really wasn't prepared for like the reality of it in my body. And I began to feel, like a lot of my kind of anxiety and like nervous system, like reactivation kind of happening. And several weeks after, the election, it was like early to mid-December, and I was feeling particularly bad, and I got up and I was feeling nauseous, and it reminded me of the day that I had my Kundalini awakening, and I was like, oh no. So I like went to the toilet and I was like dry heaving, and I got back up and I was like feeling weird, and I was like, oh no, universe, like I don't have time to die again right now. Like, please don't do this. Like, I just like was like, I don't have the capacity. But instead of me being like blasted open like before, something else happened. It was like my brain opened up and all this information was just like airdropped into my mind. And it was like, I could feel like the pressure of it. It was like this download of information basically. And it was in two parts. The first part was that I was meant to write a story about a Indigenous girl. And the second part was that I am here to be a part of the rise of the divine feminine in Hollywood. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, I was like, okay, information, yes. Instructions, great. Like, I'm in it to win it now. At the same time, I was also like, I need to throw up again. Like, I was feeling like really sick, but at the same time, I was just like, okay, this makes sense. Like, everything I've been through up until this point was preparing me for this. Like, I always kind of wondered, like, why did I have all this stuff happen in like 2014? It was so weird, like so random. But now I'm like, oh, Trump, like everything that I went through was preparing me to be able to like navigate this period. So I was like, oh man, like the game has changed. Like, this is getting interesting. In the wake of this incident, my nervous system was still really fried and messed up, and I kind of became concerned that I was going to have long-term effects happening again like before, especially because I still kind of felt like I wasn't back to 100%. So I signed up for another 5 days of Panchakarma. It was almost a year to the days that I had it the previous time. And this was set for the end of the month, like almost towards like the end of the year. And in the lead up to this, I was scrolling on Twitter one day when someone I follow whose taste I really admire, her name is Caroline. She said that there's this new show on Netflix called The OA and that it was really good. And I was like, for whatever reason, I was like, she has great taste. I should watch this show. Now, keep in mind, again, I really hadn't been watching a lot of TV, ironically, throughout the past 2 years when I had been going through all this stuff, except for Outlander, like I said. But for whatever reason, I was like, I need to watch this OA. So my roommate and I sat down and I was like, let's watch this OA show. And I had no idea what it was about or anything. I just kind of went in not knowing anything. And my roommate and I watched the OA and I was like, my mind is blown. This is the absolute best thing I've ever seen. We were like screaming the entire time. Like, I was so deeply moved and touched and blown away by this show. It totally redefined for me what was possible in television. And I knew that it was touching on very deep spiritual things that were very relevant for our time. And I'll never forget the scene that like really from the first episode I was sold, but like the scene that like really made me feel like it was the best show I've ever seen was when she was making the sandwich in Hap's kitchen after she was basically like kind of getting her fresh air or whatever. And she was like, it was like a power move or whatever. And I was just like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. Oh my gosh. I knew that when I saw this show that I needed to up my game. Like that there was something about, where TV was going with regards to streaming and what kinds of narratives were possible and what kinds of, different ways of telling stories you could do. I was very inspired by this, and it was on the heels of watching the OA that I wound up at this Ayurveda spa doing Panchakarma. And it was, I think the second day I was there, I walked in and one of the girls was like, Erin, this astrologer is going to be here tomorrow. Would you want to get a reading from him? And I was like, oh my gosh, like this whole year I had in the back of my mind, like wanted to see an astrologer. And I always thought that it would just appear at the right time. And now there's an astrologer here. And so it must be the right time. And so I was like, yes, I want to read with an astrologer. Like I'll take the soonest availability that you have. I'll be here tomorrow. And she's like, perfect. We'll sign you up for tomorrow after your session. So the following day after my treatments, I rolled into this yurt that was like part of this spa complex. And, I had all this oil in my hair. I had no makeup on. I was like wearing this sweatshirt. I was looking kind of raw. But I sat down next to this guy, this astrologer, and I gave him my birthday, my birth time, and my location of birth. And he pulled up my chart. And immediately he just began gushing about me. He was like, oh my gosh, I love you already. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, thanks. And he explained to me that he's a Vedic astrologer. And so he uses a system of astrology that is, or a calculation of astrology called sidereal astrology, as opposed to Western tropical astrology, which means that my placements in Vedic astrology are different than what I would maybe know from what is the more popular Western astrology. And so this is all news to me. I was like, ooh, tell me more. And he was like, he went on about some of my stuff. And basically, he said a lot of very deep things about my life that he would have had no reason to know if this wasn't a real science. He said that I have this placement in my chart called 12th house Jupiter, which means that I am like from the angelic realm, or I have this kind of guardian angel presence around me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just watched the OA. And so I was like, that's so crazy that you're saying this. And, but he's like, it also kind of means that, like, the way that you have it in your chart, it kind of means that you take on a lot of immense suffering. And it's happening in order for you to build out your extreme compassion. And I was like, wow, like, that does make sense. Like, I have really been struggling. And he's like, yes, you have been in this, like, you're in this Venus period. And it's a 20-year long period. And you are almost done. You have only 2 parts of it left. It ends in 2021. However, your Venus is afflicted. In his system, it's thrice cursed. So it has been a very challenging time for you. And I was like, yes, like, I've been suffering with my mental health for so long, like for the majority of my life. And he's like, yes. And he's like, but it's all this is about to shift out. It's just that we have to get you there to 2021. And I was like, okay. And then he was also telling me things like, I have this extreme receptivity to of the sexual chakra, of the sacral chakra, at an almost evolutionary scale. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what does that mean? He was like, you are obsessed with the evolution of humanity. And I was like, yes, like, I think about this like all the time. And he was like, tell me a bit about your work. And I was like, well, I'm really interested, in basically creating new stories in the realm of myth. And he's like, exactly. You are here to be a new mythos maker. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is so resonant with me. He's like, it's interesting because, I read for a lot of creatives, and there are a bunch of you kind of popping up online right now. And I was like, oh, wow. And he's like, you're definitely here to do something big. You are guaranteed fame in your chart. And I was like, oh my gosh. He's like, but again, it's Saturn is holding it back because he wants you to be fully baked. And I was like, and he was like, you will be impatient. And I'm like, I already am impatient. And so he was just like really validating a lot of the things that I had been experiencing. And he also said that I have this thing in my chart called a Hanuman circuit, and that it has to do with he's the protector of the immune system of God, he explained to me, and that I have this extreme ambition to protect the divine feminine. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly all of what I'm about. And I was like, okay, this guy clearly knows what he's talking about. My mind is blown by all the things he's saying to me. He again confirms that the age of 31, 2021 is my year of success, like these other people had told me earlier in the year. And all I have to do is make it there. So given how accurate he had been about every other element of my life, I was like, okay, astrologer, pray tell, how is my romantic life doing these days? And he's like, there are things holding the husband back for you because there's a danger that you'll get distracted from your real work. And I'm like, probably. But he mentioned that my chart suggests that my husband will be much older than me. And I was kind of just like, I've kind of been there, done that. Like, I was like, yeah, like I did date an older man once, and that's basically it. And he was like, honestly, you could go out there and have fun if you want. And I was like, I don't know. I kind of don't really want to. I kind of just want to like jump to the thing that will be like my thing. And so he was like, you know, it is there. There's a lot of passion there. It's just that it's being held back a bit. And I was like, okay, fine. And then he was like, listen, with Vedic astrology, we do these things called remedies. And when I give you these remedies, it helps to balance out things and, you know, improve your whole experience. And I was like, sweet. And he's like, for you, since you have such a weird chart and for a variety of reasons, your remedies are going to have to be a little bit outside the box. And I'm like, okay. He's like, for one thing, I want you to read the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And I was like, okay, I will do that. And then he's like, also Autobiography of a Yogi. And I was like, actually, I've read that one already. And I was like, are you talking about Kriya Yoga? And he was like, yes. And I'm like, I actually was very interested in Kriya Yoga. And he's like, well, you may not be at the point yet where you want to commit to a single meditation technique, but you would work really well with Kriya Yoga. And I actually am a Kriya Yoga practitioner and I can teach it to you. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this whole time I've been looking for someone who could teach me Kriya Yoga. And this person has been delivered to me on my doorstep, basically. So I was like, wow, I really am on the right track with all of this stuff. And then he was like, and the other thing I really want to refer to you as a remedy is ayahuasca. And I was like, oh, wow. And he was like, for you, I just feel like it would be very helpful in opening you up to the shamanic realms. And I was like, you know, this is interesting because I had looked into it in college, but I had never actively pursued it because it just seemed like kind of far out there and that you have to like go to South America and all these things. And he's like, oh, you don't have to do that. My best friend is a shaman and all you have to do is, you know, if you want to pursue this, just contact him and you can set yourself up to participate in some ceremonies here in town. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea you could even do that. And he was like, yeah, I definitely feel it'd be helpful for you. And I was just like, wow, I feel like this whole other dimension is now opening up for me. And like things were really tense, but you know, that at least I was now kind of being set on this like new track. And I remember one of the last things this astrologer said to me, he said, you know, if there's one thing I can tell you about this life, it's that it's never going to be boring.